They laughed at the porch where my father once sang me lullabies. I heard it before I saw them, the easy laughter of youth, careless and sharp, echoing down the empty street. I was standing across the road, hidden behind the old oak that had once shaded my mother's rose garden. The house sat there, slouched in its own silence, as if tired of standing. Paint peeled from the walls like shedding skin. The fence leaned, missing 2 planks. A shutter hung loose, tapping softly in the wind. Haunted, one of them said, giggling as she pointed to the attic window. Another called it a perfect set for a ghost movie. Their voices bounced against the brick, careless, thoughtless, young. I stood still. I didn't tell them that once, light poured from every window, that my mother used to hum while washing the lace curtains they were now mocking, that my father had built that porch with his own hands, hammering between his night shifts at the mill. The house had been our pride, our first, our only. We didn't own much, but that house was proof we'd made it through the hardest years. Now it was a shell. To them, a joke. To me, a wound that never stopped aching. I watched them walk around, snapping pictures on their phones, pretending to act frightened, daring each other to peek inside. Their laughter carried easily, cruel in its innocence. One girl whispered, "Who'd ever live in a dump like this?" And I felt something deep inside me tightened, not anger, but a kind of sorrow that sits low in your chest, heavy and quiet. The wind picked up, swirling dust along the front path. A scrap of old curtain fluttered in the broken window. For a moment, it looked like a hand waving goodbye. I clutched my purse tighter. I didn't want them to see me. The invisible old woman they'd never imagined had once danced barefoot on that same porch. I just wanted to see if the house still stood, if time had left me anything at all. Their laughter faded as they moved on, leaving behind nothing but cigarette butts and echoes. I crossed the street slowly, my shoes crunching on gravel. The gate creaked as I touched it, and the sound made my throat tighten. I could still see the faint carving on the post, my initials and my bros, etched in childish pride decades ago. I brushed my fingers over the rough wood. "You're still here," I whispered, as if the house could hear me. The street was quiet again. Only the wind answered. I wanted to tell them, those girls, that this house once smelled of warm bread and lilac soap, that it had known music and love, but I didn't. Some truths don't need defending. They live in silence, stronger for it. I turned my gaze to the upstairs window, where the curtains used to sway in the summer breeze, and a single thought whispered through me, if only they knew who once lived inside. And that's when the first memory stirred, rising like dust from the old floorboards of my mind. Every corner of that house still whispers a name no one remembers. My parents built it in the late 40s, when the war had just ended and hope was a fragile thing, trembling like a candle in the wind. I can still see my father, his sleeves rolled up, mixing cement in a rusted wheelbarrow. My mother handed him bricks, one by one, humming softly under her breath. They didn't have much, but what they had, they gave to those walls. The wood for the beams came from a fallen oak at the edge of the field. My father said, "If something strong must die, let it live again here." And so it did. The scent of sawdust filled the air for weeks. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can smell it, sharp and sweet, like the promise of new beginnings. When the house was finished, my mother baked bread every morning. The aroma drifted through every room, mingling with the faint scent of fresh paint and the laughter of neighbors who came to see our miracle. We were poor, yes, but inside that house, we were rich with love. My father would sing in the evenings, sitting on the porch with his guitar, his voice steady and warm. I would curl up beside him, my head on his knee, believing the world could never change. Years passed, and I grew up within those walls. My first steps across the kitchen floor, my first tears on the front steps when I scraped my knee, my first secret whispered under the attic rafters. Every sound, every shadow, had meaning. Even the way the floorboards creaked felt like part of our language. Then I married. My husband, gentle and steady, helped my parents keep the place alive. We raised our own children there, 2 boys and a girl. The rooms echoed again with laughter, with the clatter of breakfast plates and the squeals of muddy shoes on rainy days. For a long time, life was full and bright, but the years, they take what they want. My parents went first, one after the other. My husband followed after the illness. The children left for lives far away, new countries, new dreams. They called less, visited even less. And the house began to fade. The roof sagged where storms had touched it. The garden grew wild, swallowing the old rose bushes. Inside, the wallpaper peeled in soft curls, like paper memories surrendering to time. I tried to keep it alive, dusting, mending, talking to it as if it could hear, but houses, like hearts, grow quiet when no one listens. Still, I could never let it go. It held every version of me, the child, the bride, the mother, the widow, all of them still lingered there, waiting. And as I stood there that day, watching strangers mock what they could never understand, I knew I had to go back inside one last time. They said no one important lived here. I almost told them, almost. I stood by the edge of the gate, half hidden behind the overgrown lilac bush. The young couple had come back, the same ones who laughed the day before. They carried coffee cups and phones, their voices slicing through the still air like bright ribbons of noise. She found it listed for almost nothing. The young man said, probably abandoned for decades. No one important ever lived here. That word, important, it struck like a cold hand against my heart. What did he know about importance? My father, who worked until his fingers bled just to keep this roof over us, was he not important? My mother, who kept us fed with bread and prayers, was she not? Importance, to them, meant fame, not sacrifice. They pushed the front door open. It gave way with a moan, the sound of old hinges, remembering better days. I wanted to shout, be gentle, but my voice stayed caught in my throat. They walked in, phones raised, recording the dust, the broken light, the bones of what used to be my home. Creepy, the girl said, stepping into the parlor. Can you imagine living here? I had every inch of that room once glowed with sunlight and chatter. The spot where she now pointed her flashlight was where my brother and I built blanket forts. The cracked window still bore the faint scratch of our initials, M&T, carved with a kitchen knife we weren't supposed to touch. The young man laughed. Bet it's haunted. Look at these stains, could be blood. I flinched. It was cranberry jam. My mother had spilled it on the floor one summer morning when she rushed to answer the postman. I could still see her kneeling there, laughing, her hands sticky and sweet. Their laughter filled the hollow rooms, careless, echoing off memories they could never touch. My palms trembled. I wanted to step forward, to tell them that the ghosts they mocked were only love and time, but I didn't. Some truths lose their shape when spoken too soon. So I stayed silent and watched them wander deeper inside, their footsteps stirring the dust of the past, unaware that beneath their feet, the house was still listening. They touched the portrait and laughed. I watched through the cracked window, my breath fogging the glass as the couple stepped into the old study. The room had always been my father's pride, shelves lined with yellowed books, the faint smell of pipe tobacco still lingering in the wood. The air inside seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The girl brushed her hand across the mantel, leaving a streak through the dust. Look, she said, pointing to the portrait that still hung above the fireplace, the only thing that had never been taken down. It was faded now, the edges curled, the frame cracked where humidity had swollen the wood. My father stood in that portrait, dressed in his uniform, chest adorned with ribbons. Beside him, my mother, young, steady, in her nurse's whites, her smile calm and proud. They had both served during the war, he in the field, she in the hospital tents. That photo was taken the year they came home, the same year they began building this house. The young man leaned closer. They look so serious, like they're judging us. The girl giggled. Maybe they're the ghosts. She tapped the frame lightly, and it tilted. My throat burned as I pressed my palm against the window pane. Don't, I whispered, though they couldn't hear me if they had looked closer. They might have seen the small plaque at the bottom, the one that once bore my parents' names, now rusted and unreadable. They might have known that this house had been a refuge for returning soldiers, that the garden once grew food for families who had nothing. But the past, when unseen, becomes invisible to those who never knew it. The young man took a quick video, panning over the portrait with mock gravity. Haunted heroes, he said, laughing. A sliver of light from the window fell across my mother's painted face, and for a moment her eyes seemed alive again, tired, kind, watchful. I felt a surge of something between grief and defiance rise in me. They laughed again, and that was the last sound I could bear to hear before I decided it was time to step forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The air inside the house felt thick, as if it recognized me before they did. I walked slowly up the path, each step crunching over gravel that had once been swept clean every Sunday morning. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorframe. From inside, I heard them talking, light, careless words, still echoing around the walls that had carried our family's prayers. I knocked softly, once. The The sound startled them. The girl gasped. The boy froze mid-sentence. "Who's there?" he called out. I stepped into the doorway. Dust swirled around me like memory. "Would you like to know who lived here?" I asked. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid things. They exchanged a look, half guilt, half curiosity. The girl tried to smile. "Oh, sorry, we didn't think anyone still cared." I finished for her. My words came gently, but they hung in the air like a bell's last echo. For a moment, no one moved. The old house creaked, as if listening. I looked around the broken window, the torn wallpaper, the portrait still tilting on the wall. My father's eyes seemed to watch the scene unfold. "This was my home," I said quietly. "My parents built it after the war. The people in that portrait, they weren't ghosts. They were builders of hope." The boy lowered his phone. The girl stared at me, her face softening. "We didn't mean, I know," I said, though I wasn't sure they understood. It's easy to laugh at what time has broken. Harder to see what time once protected. The silence that followed was deep, almost sacred. Outside, a crow called sharp, distant. I stepped farther in, brushing my hand along the wall. The dust clung to my skin like memory, refusing to fade. "Would you like to hear what this house remembers?" I asked softly. They nodded, wordless now, and just like that, the past began to stir, ready to speak, through me once more. This house fed 12 hungry children, when the world outside had none. They sat across from me in the parlor, their hands folded, the dust floating between us like faint ghosts of old laughter. The girl's eyes darted around, taking in the faded furniture, the cracked photographs on the mantel, the faint scent of old wood and lilac soap that still lingered. "My parents built this place for more than themselves," I began. My voice was steady, but it trembled at the edges. "During the war, when families fled the city, they opened these doors to strangers, mothers with babies, old men with trembling hands, children with no shoes. They came with nothing but fear, and left with warmth." The boy looked down at his phone, ashamed, as though the tiny screen could hide him from the weight of my words. "My mother baked bread every morning. My father brought home sacks of flour and potatoes from the mill. When the power went out, he wired lamps from scraps, just so the children wouldn't sleep in darkness. There were nights when the house shook from the sirens outside, but my parents still sang. They wanted every frightened heart to believe, even for a moment, that they were safe." The girl whispered, "All of that happened here." I nodded. "In this very room. That corner," I pointed, "was where we kept a crib for the smallest one. And that wall, that's where my father measured each child's height with a pencil. He used to joke that our house was growing taller through them." Their eyes followed my finger, seeing, perhaps for the first time, not decay, but life. "This house isn't haunted," I said softly. "It's holy. Every brick remembers kindness." The silence that followed was thick, reverent. The young man swallowed hard. The girl brushed a tear from her cheek. And as the dust settled around us, I felt the air grow lighter, as though the house itself had been waiting years to be heard again. They mocked a monument, and didn't even know it. I rose slowly, crossing to the old writing desk near the window. Its drawers stuck, swollen with age, but I knew exactly where to find it. I had kept it safe, tucked beneath old letters and a yellowed ribbon. The paper crinkled as I unfolded it, thin, fragile, like the last breath of memory. The headline was faded but still legible. "Local couple saves dozens during blackout." Beneath it, a photograph of my parents, side by side, medals gleaming on their chests, faces solemn but proud. I laid it gently on the table. "That's them," I said. The boy leaned forward, his mouth parting slightly. The girl pressed her hand to her lips. "They were heroes," she whispered. "They were people," I replied. "Good people who believed in helping others, even when no one thanked them." Their eyes lingered on the image. You could almost hear the moment their laughter turned to remorse. The same mouths that had joked now stayed silent, heavy with understanding. "My father never liked to talk about those days," I continued. "He said real courage didn't need witnesses. But I kept this, not for glory, but so I'd never forget the cost of kindness." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying a soft rustle through the trees. The old curtains lifted slightly, brushing against the sunlight like a blessing. The girl looked up at me, her voice trembling. "Why didn't anyone tell their story?" "Because time forgets what people stop remembering," I said, "and I was too quiet for too long." The boy set his phone down on the table. "We'll stop recording," he murmured. "We shouldn't have." I stopped him with a small wave of my hand. "Maybe you should keep it. But tell the truth this time." Their faces softened. guilt melting into reverence. The room seemed to breathe again, the portrait above us glowing faintly in the afternoon light. For the first time in years, I felt my parents' presence not as grief, but as grace. Maybe walls don't die, they just wait to be heard again. I sat back in my old chair, the fabric thin and worn beneath my fingers. I let it fall apart, I admitted quietly. After my husband died, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. Every wall held a memory, every crack, a voice I still loved. The girl nodded, her eyes shining. You didn't want anyone to change it. No, I said softly, I just didn't want pity. I wanted someone to see it for what it was, not ruins, but remembrance. The boy walked toward the window, looking out at the overgrown garden. It could be beautiful again, he said. We could help fix the roof, clear the weeds. For a moment, I said nothing. The thought of strangers touching what was sacred once felt unbearable, but something in their eyes, the humility, the regret, eased the ache. Perhaps, I said, some stories just need new voices. The girl smiled faintly. Then let us help you tell it. I looked around the room, the faded wallpaper, the dust dancing in sunlight, the portrait watching from the wall. For years, this house had been a grave of memories, but now, with two strangers standing in its heart, it felt alive again. Do you hear that? I asked quietly. They listened. The old beams creaked, the wind whistled softly through the gaps. The faint echo of laughter, not theirs, but echoes of the ones who came before. It remembers, I whispered, and now, so will you. Outside, the afternoon light stretched golden across the porch where my father once sang. I could almost hear his tune, faint but steady, carried by the wind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt witnessed on, as the young couple began to plan, their voices low and earnest. I closed my eyes and let the house breathe again, not as a relic of sorrow, but as a home waiting to be reborn. They came to mock a ruin, but stayed to rebuild a story. The next morning, they returned, no cameras, no laughter this time, just rolled up sleeves, paint cans, and a quiet determination that softened the air. I watched them from the porch steps as they unloaded brushes, tools, and a bucket of nails. Their movements were uncertain at first, as if afraid the house might reject their touch. Where do we start? The girl asked. The porch, I said. It held us once. It deserves to stand tall again. Together we worked, the rhythm of our hands blending with the chirp of sparrows and the hum of summer heat. The boy sanded the railings until the wood shone smooth again. The girl repainted the steps, white, like they once were when my mother used to scrub them clean every Sunday. As I brushed dust from the old fence, my fingers found something familiar carved into the grain. Letters, faint but clear. M and T, my brother and me, our childish claim to eternity. I smiled. Looks like the house remembers everything, I murmured. The girl looked up from her work, her forehead streaked with paint. Then we'll help it remember beautifully. We spent days like that, mending, cleaning, talking about everything and nothing. They told me about their small apartment, their struggles, their dreams of owning something that felt like home. I listened, hearing echoes of my younger self in every word. As the fence straightened and the porch brightened, something else shifted in them, in me, in the air itself. Respect replaced regret. Where laughter once hurt, it now healed. By evening, the sun dipped low, painting gold across the porch floor. The boy stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. It's not perfect, he said, but it's honest. I nodded, my heart full. That's how all good homes begin. And for the first time in years, I felt the house exhale, as though it, too, had forgiven. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel forgotten. It felt seen. Months passed. Seasons turned the trees from green to amber, and one bright morning, the house stood tall again. The paint gleamed in the sun. The windows, once dull, now caught the sky. The porch railings were straight and proud, like my father's shoulders once were. Neighbors began to gather at the gate, curious. Some remembered my parents, others had only heard stories. The young couple had spread the word, not for fame, but gratitude. We thought we found a ruin, the girl said softly to a small crowd. We found a legacy instead. I stood beside her, my hands clasped. Someone handed me a small ribbon, pale blue like my mother's apron. I tied it across the gate, and with one gentle snip, the crowd clapped. No speeches, no flash of cameras, just quiet joy. Even the old oak by the path seemed to sway with pride. Later that evening, the couple showed me the video they'd posted. No jokes this time, only truth. Footage of peeling walls, now restored. The portrait gleaming clean in its frame. my voice in the background saying, "Every brick remembers kindness." The caption read, "We learned history lives where love once did." It spread further than I ever imagined. Comments poured in, people sharing memories of their own family homes, their grandparents, their forgotten places. It wasn't about me or this house anymore. It was about all of us, what we build, what we lose, what we keep alive. As the sun set that evening, I sat on the porch steps, listening to the faint music of laughter and wind. The world felt gentle again. The house no longer carried sorrow. It carried song. And as I looked up at the portrait through the window, I whispered, "You're remembered now." Not all legacies are left in marble. Some live in the kindness we pass on. A week after the gathering, I found an envelope resting on the porch. My name, written in careful handwriting, glowed faintly in the morning light. I unfolded it slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. "Dear Margaret, you taught us that history isn't something you find in books. It breathes in places like this, in people like you. Thank you for letting us rebuild what time tried to erase. We'll never forget the lesson this house gave us." Inside was a framed photograph, the restored home in full sunlight, every detail shining. Beneath it, in small lettering, were the words, "Some stories change us forever." My eyes filled. I carried the frame inside and placed it gently on the mantel beside my parents' portrait. The light from the window touched both pictures, old and new, as if blessing the bridge between generations. I traced the edge of the frame, feeling both the ache and peace of completion. The girl's laughter echoed faintly from memory, softer now, filled with respect. The boy's careful words, his apology, his awe, lingered like a prayer in the air. Outside, children passed on bicycles, pointing at the freshly painted house. "That's the pretty one now," one said. I smiled. The house had changed and so had I. I realized it wasn't only the wood or walls that had been restored. It was faith in people, in memory, in the idea that what we love never truly disappears. As dusk settled, I lit a small lamp on the porch, the same way my mother used to do. The glow spilled gently across the steps, warm and alive. And for the first time in a long while, I whispered into the evening breeze, "You can rest now, home. You've been heard. Every old house has a heartbeat. You just have to listen close enough. If you ever pass one, slow down. Don't just see the cracked paint or the leaning fence. Look closer. The walls you think are empty might still be holding someone's laughter. The porch that sags may once have been a stage for lullabies. Even the silence, especially the silence, is full of stories, waiting for an ear kind enough to listen." I used to think memories lived only in people, that when we go, our pasts go with us. But standing on this porch now, hearing the wind move through the same trees that shaded my childhood, I know better. Memories live in places too. They root themselves deep, waiting for footsteps that remember. Sometimes, I imagine strangers walking by long after I'm gone. Maybe they'll pause, curious about this small house with its pale blue gate. Maybe they'll sense something, a warmth that doesn't quite fade, a feeling they can't explain, and maybe that will be enough. I've learned that legacy isn't about fame or monuments. It's about kindness that refuses to die. It's in a loaf of bread shared with someone hungry, a song sung to calm a frightened child, a roof held steady in the storm. It's in the quiet acts no one photographs, the ones that keep the world soft. The young couple visits sometimes. They bring flowers from the market, sometimes coffee. We sit on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. They still call it your home, but I tell them it's ours now, theirs to remember, mine to release. They smile when I say that. And I can see it, the bridge of understanding between years. I know the house won't last forever. Wood weakens, paint fades, time will do what it always does. But I no longer fear it, because what was once mocked is now loved again. And love, that's the only restoration that ever truly lasts. If you're listening to me now, maybe you've got your own old house in mind, maybe a childhood kitchen that smelled of cinnamon, or a garden where someone's laughter still lingers in the leaves. Maybe you've driven past a place that pulled at something inside you, even though you didn't know why. If you ever pass by again, stop. Let your hand rest on the gate. Listen to the creak of the hinges, the hush of the wind. You might not know the names once spoken there, but the walls will remember. They always do. And if that memory touches you, share it. Tell me about it. In the comments, write the place that still lives in your heart, the one that shaped you, healed you, or broke you in a way that made you more tender. Because when we speak our stories, we keep them alive. This house, my house, taught me that nothing built with love is ever truly lost. It just waits, patient, and quiet, for someone kind enough to see it again. So if you ever pass an old house and feel it staring back, don't look away. Smile, nod, whisper a thank you for whoever once called it home, because maybe, somewhere, a soul like mine is still watching and finally feels seen.